Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us during the lunch hour. This is Marjorie Allabastro, and I'm Jason Finn. And our plan today is to take you through about 35 minutes of sort of prepared information about being successful in the home buying process. And then at the end of the time, we're going to answer any questions that you may put in the chat, any Q&As. And so if you hover over your screen and you look down to the bottom of the window, you'll see a little question mark in a speech bubble. That's your Q&A button. So if you click on that at any time and put a question in the Q&A, we'll address those at the end of the presentation. And Allison is joining us online as well, and she's going to be our slide clicker. So Allison, go ahead and we'll take a look at our agenda. Thanks so much. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to tell you who we are. Then we're going to walk you through the home buying process itself. We've been doing this for a long time, and so we get a lot of the same questions throughout our careers, and we love questions because then we can be helpful. So we'll take you through our frequently asked mortgage questions on my side, and then Marjorie is going to tell you about some common home buyer mistakes to avoid. And then finally, as I said at the end, we'll answer any questions that our listening audience and viewing audience may have. So let's take a peek here, and I want to introduce you to Marjorie. Marjorie's my favorite realtor, real estate broker. She's at the Baird Warner Lincoln Park office, has been here for some time, and we've known each other and worked together for a number of years. She's a top agent here at the Lincoln Park offices, which is where we're physically sitting right now. And as the slide says, she truly is a trusted advisor and an invaluable ally to her clients throughout not only the home search process, but negotiation and the full transaction contract to close.
Love what I do. And next, I would like to introduce you to Jason Finn. He's the Vice President of Mortgage Lending at Key Mortgage Services, and we have worked together, as he said, for a long time. Had a great experience. He is an 18-year veteran of the Chicago real estate industry. He's held many hats. He knows this business inside and out, and he leverages that knowledge of finance, real estate, and his client advisory to really empower homeowners to make the best decisions and financial decisions in their process. Welcome.
So we're going to send these slides out at the end to all of our attendees. I won't read through all the testimonials, but I think it's worth sharing that one person, Barb W., said that Marjorie is extremely knowledgeable and will guide you step by step through the process as a first-time home buyer.
And I can say that from Sarah H., Jason, from pre-approval all the way to closing, he was patient with all of my questions, helpful, kind, courteous, and went above and beyond for me. And my personal recommendation to Jason is he's also one of the most pleasant guys and funny and fun, and he makes what can be a very stressful process a very pleasant one. So I've enjoyed working with him, and I know my clients have enjoyed working with him too.
That's really sweet. I'm flattered. That's really nice. Okay, so we'll move on, and we're going to take you through the steps of the home buying process, but I'm jumping the gun before we do that. Quick quote here from entrepreneur Marshall Field, and for those of us old enough, I won't look at your direction. You're probably too young to remember Marshall Field and the Marshall Field's department store, which is now a part of Macy's. But Marshall Field, a really successful entrepreneur, has this great quote: "Buying real estate is not only the best way, the quickest way, the safest way, but the only way to become wealthy." And the truth behind that is that for most Americans, the way they build their wealth and their biggest investment and the biggest grower of wealth is through their real estate and through their home.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. As you become wealthy, your home is one of the few things that also invests back in you. It's a place you can live, have family traditions, have holidays, and you can't do that with a stock or bond. So being a homeowner is a great way and an enjoyable way to enjoy your wealth.
Absolutely. All right, so I wanted to share this slide, and there's a couple of slides like this. This shows the disparity between the wealth that you do build as a homeowner versus a renter. And I've seen a number of really compelling statistics about the average wealth of homeowners compared to renters. But this really illustrates why and how we get there. So this particular example has to do with a $1,600 a month rental apartment and a renter living there versus buying a $250,000 condo. And a condo has other fees and things like that. So there are some additional expenses. But factoring in all of those things in this particular example, over 4 years, the home buyer had $109,000 more wealth than the renter. And you can see that $25,000 almost in home equity and personal wealth growth is what the homeowner had, and the renter was $84,000 to the negative in terms of all the rent outlaid and things like that. Yeah. And if we go to the next slide, there's a lot of really small numbers on this one. We won't get into those, but I wanted to show to you that I did my homework here for exactly how we came up with this example. We know that when you buy a home, there might be a little bit of a down payment. We didn't count that as new additional wealth growth or anything like that. As a homeowner, you might have a little bit of maintenance. I just had somebody in my home yesterday who reinstalled a microwave for me. Now, if I lived in a rental apartment, the landlord might come and do that at no cost to me. But we can see this particular example is the same two sort of properties, $250,000 condo that appreciates at a modest rate of 4.5% a year, or a $1,600 a month rental. And we know rent goes up over time. We assessed only a 4% rent growth to this over 10 years, a $330,000 almost of more wealth by being a homeowner as opposed to a renter. How many times would I have to get my microwave rehung on the wall to make up that $330,000?
Well, that's incredible when you consider what the purchase price was, what your return, your ROI there is. And at the same token, they always say you're paying someone's mortgage.
For sure.
Let it be yours instead of your landlord's, and really take advantage of that growth.
And now you can see it here in black and white and green and red.
Mm-hmm. Next slide, please.
So we'll take you through the home buying process. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mortgage part of that, and then Marjorie will take us through the steps of finding the home and negotiating and all of that stuff. First, you want to get pre-approved. And people get really excited about the home buying process because of the home, right? Not because of the loan they're getting. So sometimes they forget that this is an important first step. You get to looking at properties on the internet. Maybe you want to go to open houses, which is a great idea. And sometimes what happens is people are ready to move and their finances aren't in alignment with that. Or they find a place they love and they realize they're not looking in the right price range. And you've been there plenty of times with buyers who feel heartbroken because this place isn't going to work for them, even though they already thought they found the home of their dreams. So meeting with a lender first is a critical step. We're going to talk about things like where do you work? How do you get compensated? How often do you get compensated? And I am in the position of asking that uncomfortable question of how much money do you make, which my parents told me when I was a kid never to ask. And now in a professional sense, I need to ask that question. So it can be a little bit of an intimidating conversation because people aren't used to having that sort of conversation. But it's a critical piece. And thank you for your kind words earlier. I do try to make it as stress-free as possible. We'll ask you a little bit about your credit. Do you know what your credit score is? If you don't, that's okay. We'll get that information. What kind of debt do you have? Do you have student loans? They're not prohibitive, but we need to know that they're there. Do you have a car payment? What's your credit card situation look like? Any personal loans? So before you talk to your lender, think about some of those things. If you can pull documents together first, that's great. In the process, we'll collect those documents from you somewhere along the way. And at the end of the conversation, well, really probably within 24 hours of the end of the conversation, I'll have one of two things for you. I'll either have a pre-approval letter. You are in a situation, you are approved to purchase a home up to this purchase price, or I'll have a plan of attack for you. Maybe you're not ready to have the pre-approval letter for exactly the price you want, but here's something that we saw on your credit, and here's what it would take to get your credit into a healthier situation. Or you have this kind of debt, it looks like it's going to be gone in a few months. When it's gone, you have this much more buying power than you do today. So I don't ever like to send anybody away saying you're not pre-approved. It's really what are the next steps to make sure you're in a situation to buy a home. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you're walk away with a pre-approval. Can you talk about the difference between a pre-qualification letter and a pre-approval letter?
Ooh, the dreaded pre-qualification letter. There are, you're not going to believe this, but there are some lenders who are not as thorough as I am.
Okay.
And so if you want to get a letter, so before you look at houses and you go to an online mortgage site, let's say, maybe you go to, let's say, Pocket Mortgage, it rhymes with, and you fill out a form, and then you get back a letter right away, and that's great. And the form online says how much money do you make, how much money do you spend, what's your credit score. Maybe it'll even do a credit pull, but it won't pull in documentation. It won't verify that a lender looks at your income the same way you look at your income, for example. And so we've seen many times people have that surprise or that aha moment way later in the process, where that letter says that they can do one thing and they can't actually do it. Or I know on the list side of things, you've gotten a pre-approval letter, or I should say a pre-qualification letter, and said, I'm not sure I trust this one. I've never heard of Ed's Oil Shop at bank. And so you want to talk to somebody, you want to get a letter that's going to say, not only did we take a look at credit, but we looked at asset statements or bank statements, we looked at income, that sort of thing.
Because a good listing agent will call the lender and ask, have they been verified?
And a good lender won't wait for that phone call.
Yeah.
They'll call the listing agent
Right.
and say, I did look at JoJo's income, pay stubs, bank statements, and they are ready to go. They are well qualified, and they're going to be at the closing table with the money.
Excellent.
Yeah. Great. Next slide, please.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about getting started with the purchase process. So the first thing you want to do, or in parallel with talking to your lender, you're going to want to consult with your real estate agent. And a real estate agent can help you in three major phases of the process. The first really is education and search. The next is pricing and negotiation. And finally, contract management to closing. So getting to know your real estate agent, I kind of call it our first date. We're getting to know each other, and I'm getting to know your criteria. So we're going to look at that pre-approval letter and see what your target purchase price with the pre-approval is. But we're also going to look at the nuance of what you might want your monthly payment to be. So that's your PITI, your principal, interest, tax, insurance. And if it's a condo, if it's a homeowners association, you're going to have HOA fees or assessments. And the reason that's important is you may be approved to buy a property at $1 million, but you may not feel comfortable buying a property at $1 million. And you may say, hey, Marjorie, I really want to keep my monthly payment, at around $4,500. So depending on what the taxes are, what the HOA fees are, that can help us adjust some of those numbers to know what your target purchase price is going to be. And I've had people say, I don't want to spend my full pre-approval, and that is totally fine. You have the right to do that. Then we're going to look at areas of interest. Are you looking in the city? Is there certain neighborhoods you want to be in? Are you looking in the suburbs? What is the property type you want to focus on? Are we single family home, condo, maybe a townhouse, or even a multifamily unit? And some people are open to different categories based on what the best purchase options are, and we can discuss that and what the benefits are. We will look at your time frame as well as your soft and hard deadlines. So for example, a hard deadline may be a lease end where you can't extend, and we know we have to be under contract and closed by that date or before that date. A soft deadline might be, I'm living at my parents' right now, and I really want to get out, but I don't have a specific day that they need me to leave. So we can be flexible, or you're on a month-to-month lease. Or even some people will say, I want to buy 2 or 3 months before my hard deadline so I can paint, I can move, in time, I can redo light fixtures, things like that. So we keep both of those in mind. And then we look at your property, determine your property needs and wants. So a need is something that's fixed and can't change. I need a 3-bedroom. I need to be in this school district, a location. I need 2 levels. Well, a simplex condo, you can't duplex up in that because you got someone living above you. That's going to be a need that's unchangeable. Your wants are things that we might be able to adjust for. So I really want a stainless steel appliance package. Well, if everything else, all of your needs are met in a property, but you have a white appliance package, that's something we can adjust for in time. And so that's something we keep flexible, your needs and wants. Next slide. Then once we have been able to narrow your search criteria, we are going to start searching with different tools and scheduling those property tours. So I have a multitude of tools that I can use. One of my favorite apps is called the Zenlist app. Zenlist is great because we can collaborate as client and agent. I have the power to create searches for you, but you have the power to adjust them too, look in different areas and change criteria as you become more educated in the process and what you want. I will also use the multiple listing service that's only available to agents, but I can send you listings from that. We also use the private listing network. That's something that's really nice about Zenlist. They're one of the only tools that use the private listing network. And that is, it can add about 10% of inventory in a tight market, but it's properties that are basically coming soon. And I have helped people buy and sell properties on the PLN because if it's right in the area, the price, we might not have as much information as we would once it's actively listed, but I can call those agents. I can maybe get us in early and we can beat a crowd on a really popular property. I'm also a member of Top Agent Network. That's an invitation-only network of pocket listings between agents where people can put out, my buyer's looking for X, or an agent can say, I've got this coming on. I don't have it on the PLN. I don't have it active yet, but maybe you have a buyer looking, and we can coordinate that way, and I can send that information to you as well. And then lastly, I always encourage clients to go to open houses. This is a fantastic way for you to educate yourself on neighborhoods, property types. It's a no obligation. You can go in, check it out. The only thing I will let you know is that a lot of agents use it as lead generation. So if you've decided you want to work with a particular realtor, when they ask you to provide your information, put down your realtor's information so they're the one contacted instead of you.
Got a softball question.
Sure.
So it sounds like you talked about all these different search tools. It sounds like you have access to way more homes than I would find on Redfin or Zillow or.
Yeah. So the search engines, the one thing I would warn my clients about the search engines is you have to understand what like a Zillow or a Trulia, what their model is. They make their revenue by selling leads to agents. So their goal is to have more inventory available for people to look at, whether they are or not available. So they're very slow to change contingency status or listing status so that they get more clicks. The more clicks they get, the more they can sell those leads to agents that are on the buying side. So their end user, which you think is the buyer, really isn't their customer. The customer are agents. So you have to be careful in what you're putting on there and clicking there, because their goal is not to really do justice to you as the buyer. Their goal is to make revenue through agent clicks or clicks to sell to agents.
So they may have listings that aren't on the market anymore or that aren't available anymore.
Absolutely.
But they also, they won't have access to, am I right, the private listing network or the TAN?
They won't. And I've even had clients who've used, will send me lots of listings.
Yeah.
And then I say, that's not available, that's not available, that's under contract. And then they say, okay, fine, I'm going to rent. I'm going to Zenlist.
Yeah.
And yeah, but yes, no, that's exactly right.
Okay. Cool.
And Zenlist works with the multiple listing service, so they do update very accurately, and you do have the most timely information on that and what's available.
Great, thank you. I saw the teaser of the next slide.
There we
go.
go.
Talk about contract negotiation and making an offer.
So yes, the next stage is once we find that property that meets your needs, we're going to talk about pricing and negotiation to make a smart offer, and we are going to work on pricing and trends for today's markets. Before you put in that offer, I'm going to create a comparative market analysis for you for similar properties and what they're selling for, as well as understanding what the market is. Everything's based on supply and demand, and we have different, every year is a little different in terms of the market, but we have seasons throughout the year too. So we have busier times versus less busy times. You might not have as much inventory in the winter, but you may be able to get a bigger discount on something in the winter than you would in spring market, where you're going to have more buyers out there, but you're going to have a lot more properties available too. So we really try to be strategic about pricing and putting in your offer. But in addition to price, things that win offers are time to close, earnest money, the right financing. There are a lot of nuances to contracts. So we have to look at all of the different elements and make you as compelling of an offer as possible, especially in a multiple offer situation. And then I say, trust your agent to lead the negotiations in your favor. Good communication and relationships can win a contract for you. And that is really true. I have won contracts for my clients because I have known the agent on the other side. They know they're going to see a professional experience, which is what they're looking for their seller. I'm not going to bring a lot of drama. We're going to handle everything professionally. And so excellent communication and having someone who's been in this industry for a while can really be to your favor.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. I've had situations where clients want a multiple offer situations because not only did the agent know the listing agent, but I knew the listing agent.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this for a little while.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, we have a great deal of confidence in Key Mortgage and Jason, what he can do. And we've never heard of this other lender on this pre-approval. So
absolutely.
Those relationships are critical.
Huge.
Yeah. Next slide, please.
So this is my purchase timeline. Usually for 3 to 6 months before you're thinking of making your purchase is when you want to meet with your team. But we've met with people up to a year, even 18 months ahead of time.
9 years is my record.
Are you kidding?
I'm not kidding.
Well, I can't beat that. I cannot beat that. But it's a good time to get your team on board. Ask your questions. Do your due diligence because this is your time to be educated in the process. You want to get your pre-approval ready. Pre-approvals last for about 90 days, and then you can re-up it for 90-day segments after that. But it will help you with a lot of good information. And if you find that property on the first time out, you're ready to go if that's, you know, what you want to do. And then you're going to want to begin your search and property tours. And once we find that property, then we get back to the contract negotiation. When we have an accepted contract, we're looking at about 30 to 45 days to close. Now, sometimes it can be a little longer based on the situation of the seller. We've been in the seller's market in the city, in certain north side of the city for a while, so they have dictated a bit of this. But if they're selling and they have to buy something, they might want a little longer time frame, but a lot of them still want to close quickly. They're fine to go to an Airbnb for a little while so that they have their cash to go buy their next property. So then we'll have contract and acceptance and your first earnest money payment. Then we will get into 5 business days to complete your due diligence, your inspections. We may do a general inspection, depending on the property, perhaps radon, perhaps a sewer scope for single family homes. And then we're going to move into the attorney review stage. So that's another negotiation point where we can make contract modifications and we can negotiate any items that came up during the inspection timeframe. And based on that, if we decide to move forward at that point, your final earnest money is due. Then you'll begin your mortgage and financing period where you go through underwriting and you're looking to get your clear to close. Once you have your clear to close, we do a final walkthrough and we have our closing day.
Clear to close are my 3 favorite words.
Yeah, totally. 3 favorite letters.
And this, this seems like a lot, right? There's a lot in this timeline, but that's why home buyers work with professionals. Yeah. Marjorie's done this 1,000 times. I've done this 1,000 times. And so while these steps, you don't have to remember to keep them, what order you're keeping them in. That's what your real estate Sherpa is here for.
Yes. Yeah. And this is high level. There are a lot of nuance. When we get going, we'll go into the nitty gritty of it, but this gives you a high level idea of how quickly it can move.
Perfect. Next slide, please.
Some good to know items. When we get into contracts, we do have a number of contingencies that protect our buyer throughout the transaction. We have as we talked about, the inspection and attorney review period. During that time, you can cancel a contract other than for price only. If you decide that you find something inspection that you don't want to move forward with, you can get out and you can get the initial earnest money back. The mortgage contingency, appraisal contingency, and for people selling and then are looking to buy, they have a home close or home sale contingency. In competitive markets in the city, these are much, much less common, but they do exist. Earnest money. People always ask about earnest money. Earnest money is a deposit against your purchase of the property. It's usually in the city, we see about 2 to 5% of the purchase price. It is a negotiable item. And we see it in 2 stages. We see initial earnest money, which is usually a smaller amount, maybe $1,000, maybe $1,500, depending on the price of the property. And that is, I always call it funny money, because during your due diligence, you get that money back if you decide not to move forward. No harm, no foul. However, once you get through attorney review and you decide to move forward, the larger chunk is then due, the final earnest money. And that really is a deposit against your performing on that contract. So if you pull out, other than for one of those other contingency reasons, maybe a mortgage contingency, you would not get that money back. The seller would be able to keep it. But when you do close, that goes against your money to close, your cash to close. So it's just a deposit that's sitting there waiting for you to close on the property.
Still your money.
Yes.
Assuming you go through with the transaction, when you get to the closing table, that money's there waiting for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And closing costs. I usually recommend you plan for about 2% of the purchase price. That can be very flexible depending on what credits you get from the seller. They're going to be taxes, there might be inspection items, things like that. But to plan for about 2%, you're usually pretty safe.
Next slide, please. So now it's our job, it's Marjorie's job and my job to make sure that once you have that contract, that we get through smoothly to the closing table. So we're going to monitor all these deadlines for you. We're going to be in touch with you on a regular basis. We'll track and monitor the status of the conversation you're having with the attorney review process. Mm-hmm. And as Marjorie said, that might be some contract modifications, it might be some inspection remedies, things like that. We are going to, and particularly my job and my company is going to work on that mortgage approval process. And so one of the things we're going to do is send an appraiser out to the property to make sure that the value of the home is in line with market expectations. And frankly, the appraisal process came about a long time ago to prevent fraud. When the first appraisers went out, sometimes there was no home there at all that people were borrowing again. That doesn't happen very much these days, and certainly not in the city of Chicago. And then we're going to maintain the communication, and you'll continue to communicate with us, your team, to address any issues that come up, concerns you might have, or questions you might want to ask. And you shouldn't feel shy. We do this all the time. This might be your first time, and so you might ask the same question 2 or 3 times, and we don't mind answering the same question a couple of times.
And as we monitor this process, you have to remember we are your team. We are your fiduciary, or I'm your fiduciary. We are here to look out for your best interests. So that's something that we absolutely take to heart as we do this process.
For sure. What happens next?
And then if everything goes well throughout the process, we've done our job and you're happy with the property and everything you've learned about it, we head to the closing table and you get to now be a homeowner.
Awesome. I'm ready to pop that bottle of champagne. All right. So just in summary, to go through the process from start to finish, you're going to first get a loan pre-approval. You're going to talk to a lender that you trust, and they're going to put that letter together. Then you're going to meet with your qualified real estate agent and get a comfort level with them and talk about what your plan is and what you're looking for. You're going to start looking at those homes. When you find the one you love, you're going to make a smart and fair offer. And you'll do the home inspection to make sure the home's in the condition that you expect and there are no surprises. And you're going to conduct your attorney review process. Next, we're going to track important deadlines and stay in touch and communicate on our way to heading to the closing table, sealing the deal, and giving your keys. Next slide. So there are a number of questions that we get frequently. This is the FAQ section. That's okay, Allison. We can go jump right to the mortgage one. And I'll talk about the common questions that people have about mortgages. And then after that, Marjorie will talk about some common homebuyer mistakes, ones that you can avoid. So one very common question we get is, how much do I need for a down payment? First-time homebuyers can have as little as 3% in down payment. And even that has a little asterisk or a caveat. So I'm going to talk about down payment assistance, which might further reduce the amount of money that you need to come out of your pocket. But from a guidelines or a rules perspective, a conventional mortgage, first-time homebuyer, 3% down. Repeat homebuyer, 5% down. And FHA, which is a different kind of loan, it's a government-insured loan, whether you're a first-time homebuyer or a repeat homebuyer, it's a 3.5% down payment. There's some other thresholds that we'll talk about when we meet, like what if I want to buy a multi-unit property, or what if I want to avoid private mortgage insurance. Spoiler, that's at 20% down. So we can talk about all of those things when we meet. Second is, what should my debt to income ratio be? So when we talk about how much folks should spend on their home costs every month, as a general rule, and there are a lot of caveats and exceptions, first we start with how much money are you making pre-tax, right? What's your gross income? And then we say you should be spending at a cap about 1/3 to maybe 40% of your gross income every month on your housing. So that could be your rent, or if you're buying a home, that's the PITI that Marjorie talked about, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, plus your homeowners association or condo assessment. Then we take that housing payment and we add any other monthly debt obligations you have, student loans, credit cards, stuff like that. And that full ratio, we want that to be less than 45, sometimes up to 50%. So that's a lot of math there. But if you think about what you make and what you spend on housing, you get an idea of, are you in the right ballpark? And of course, we drill in on that further. What's an acceptable credit score range? So if your credit score is below 500, then we have a little bit of work that we need to do in order to find a mortgage that'll work for you. If your credit score is above 500 and less than 580, then we can do an FHA mortgage with at least 10% down. If your credit score is 580 or above, we can do an FHA mortgage with 3.5% down. So the most common kind of FHA mortgage. And then technically, when your credit is 620 or above, you can do a conventional mortgage. And the reason I say technically is there are other things that come into account that you may still want to do an FHA mortgage if your credit score is 640 or 650 or 680 or 700, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So there's a bunch of different options. And I study this full time, all day, every day. And sometimes, much to my wife's mocking, I'll lay in bed and read guidelines and learn more. So I'm a geek for this stuff, and we can really drill into the details. What is mortgage insurance? So I sort of tease this a little bit. If you put down less than 20%, or if you have less than 20% equity in your home, the lender says there's a little bit more risk to us. If you stop as a homeowner paying your mortgage and you've only got 3% down, the lender's on the hook for 97% of the value of the home. And if they have to turn around and resell that home, they're not going to get that all back. So this mitigates that risk a little bit more for the lender. It can be a very small amount of money. I've seen private mortgage insurance for $12 or $15 a month. And I've seen private mortgage insurance certainly for more than that, hundreds of dollars a month in some cases. So it really depends on a number of factors, and that's something we would review together. What if I don't have enough money for a down payment? So the best programs that we have available right now allow a home buyer to become a homeowner with only 1% of the purchase price of the home out of pocket. And there's a couple different mechanisms we would use to do that. One would be a down payment assistance program that reduces your obligation for down payment. And some of that would be the negotiation that you would do with Marjorie to get the seller to cover a lot of the closing costs for you. But that minimum obligation would be 1% of the purchase price of the home. But in some cases, even that 1% can come as a gift from a family member. Yeah. So if a parent or a child or a step parent said, I would like to help you become a homeowner, here's $2,000, and you're buying a home with $200,000 or less, you may be out of pocket $0.00
Wow.
To become a homeowner. The other nice thing is you don't get your mortgage payment until the first of, not the month following your closing, but the month after that. So you may actually, in some cases, come out ahead because you didn't have a rent payment that next month, and you didn't have a mortgage payment yet. So that's kind of cool. And then finally, how do I determine how much I can afford? I feel like this one was a little bit of a setup. The short answer is you talk to me. But basically, it comes back to those ratios, right? So you want to be spending about 1/3 to 40% of your gross income on your housing and less than 50% of your gross income on your debt plus your housing together. Next slide, please. See how we're doing on time.
So six common mistakes to avoid when buying a home. So this is what you don't want to do. You don't want to search without getting your pre-approval first. It really does help you guide you into property types, property values that you want to focus on. And every real estate agent has a story about that client who's gone to that home and been like, oh my God, this is the one. And they weren't ready. They lose out. And then they're always trying to measure up to that property again. So just be ready. What is it? The Boy Scouts always be prepared, something like that. Sure. This is a good one. Number one, contacting the listing agent and not the buyer's agent. So in Illinois, each party, a seller and a buyer, are represented by an agent, typically. When you contact the listing agent, that listing agent's obligation and responsibility is to that seller. And so they're going to work really hard to get the seller the best deal, and they are not representing you. You can make a very costly mistake by not having representation when you are purchasing a property. Clicking the Show Me Now button on Redfin or Zillow. I think that buying food online with a click is wonderful. I think getting a ride to the airport is wonderful, but you do not want to buy probably the most expensive purchase in your life with a Uber Eats driver, so to speak. You want someone who's a professional, who does this full time, who really knows the industry and knows the pitfalls. And part of the models, like I said, Zillow is about selling clicks to agents, and Redfin is about lower cost showings. And they can do a good job for some people, but I say that I would like a professional who's dedicated full time and knows this business inside and out. 4, not using a real estate transaction attorney. Again, same thing. Seller's going to have an attorney. You want to have an attorney representing you on one of the biggest purchases of your life, who's going to understand real estate law and make sure that you are protected during the process.
And I'll just add really quickly that when you hear attorney, you think, oh no, they're going to charge me by the hour, a ton of money. A real estate transaction attorney, they charge me a flat fee, right, over the whole transaction.
And I don't think I have known anyone who charges more than $1,000, and it's part of your it gets becomes a part of your closing cost at the closing table, so you do not have to write a check. It is usually probably about $550 to $750 is the average real estate attorney flat fee. Not assembling your real estate team ahead of time. Again, when you find that property, you do not want to be scrambling. You want to make sure that you have someone that you work well with, who you trust, who can advise you well and provide you all the information you need. to make this a smooth process and to make sure that you are successful in the purchase, and then it's a wise purchase, and not reaching out to us after this seminar with questions or concerns. And one of my favorite parts of this job is working with first-time home buyers and helping educate them and being successful. And I love when they come back to me a few years later and they realize how well they've done. It is one of the best parts of this job, and I love that part.
Yeah, awesome. Me too. Excellent.
So take advantage of it.
All right.
Now it's time for the Q&A.
We'll pull up our Q&A window here, and my mouse doesn't want to work. Here we go. Okay, very good. And I'm also going to ask Allison while we do these, since they won't see the questions on the screen, to move ahead to our contact information slide.
Okay.
If you don't mind, Allison, and we'll go through some of these questions. So the first one, I'll ask this question because you have to answer.
Okay.
So how much do I have to pay a real estate agent to help me buy a home?
So this is, I'm going to give the high-end version of this. It can't get into nitty-gritty, but essentially, a real estate agent that helps a buyer is actually paid by the seller. The seller will contract with the listing agent a portion of a fee to pay for the listing agent services, but also to pay the buyer's agent. However, the buyer's agent does not work for the seller. The buyer's agent works for that buyer, represents that buyer, even though they're paid out of the transaction and then paid at the closing table. So we're only paid if we're successful in helping you purchase that home. The thing that you need to keep in mind on this, because you're going to hear a lot about this news, there's been a lot of questions about this right now and how this has been structured traditionally. In the end, the buyer is really paying both the commissions because the buyer is bringing the money to the table. The buyer is making the transaction. And when you look at the averages of sale prices right now, they are traditionally including those fees for both the listing and selling agents. Sometimes you'll hear selling agent, it also means buying agent. So you are paying that fee and you deserve to be well represented. So did I answer that thoroughly?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I guess the only distinction I would make is the buyer is not showing up with a separate check to pay their real estate agent, right?
Now generally no, because what's happening and changing the law right now is it's included in most transactions. However, a seller can elect to pay nothing to a buyer's agent. In those cases, we will see that ahead of time. You will sign a representation agreement with me. My fee would be 2.5%. At that time, you would agree that and we know this ahead of time, if we saw a property and you were interested in purchasing that property, then you would pay that. Now, there are ways to still keep it in the transaction. We can still put it in the contract for the seller to pay it. We can make it a closing cost credit. There are different ways to handle that. That is probably in less than 0.5% of transactions at this point. We've always dealt with this for sale by owners and in other ways, but I'm getting very much into the weeds here, but basically it becomes a part of the transaction and you don't write a separate check on top of the purchase price of the property.
I think that's great. And I think also having that extra detail is helpful to understand for an experienced real estate team member, the value of having done this enough times. Yeah. That when you're presented with something like, well, how do we fit this commission into the closing costs? Because maybe the buyers have a certain amount of money that they had planned to outlay or to spend. How do we work that in without them being out of pocket any more money? And there are strategies, but they do take navigating the guidelines. And so you have to work with somebody who's done it before. We have a question from Pamela K. And she asked, should everyone...
I'll ask you that. Should everyone have a cash down payment?
Well, so this is a little bit of a loaded question because for a lender, when they see the word cash, they get very literal.
Okay.
So we addressed some of this in sort of the plan preparation. I want to say something about cash, which is that if you have literal cash, if you have a briefcase full of cash or you tuck it in your mattress or something like that, lenders want to know where the money has come from. There's an anti-money laundering part of this. There's an anti-terrorism part of this. There's all kinds of federal guidelines that go around this. So lenders want to know where money came from. Now, if money has been in the bank for 2 months and you provide your last 2 bank statements and that money has always been in there, that's as much diligence as the lender needs to do. So don't keep cash on hand if you're going to be using that money to buy a house. So I took that in the most literal sense of the question. I think probably the broader question is, does everybody need to have money to buy a home? And we touched on that a little bit in the presentation, which is that as little as 1% down payment, based on some of the programs we have, based on working some of the closing costs into the transaction. And then even then that 1% can be gifted. And it should be, the guidelines used to say literally a family member, and it would define exactly who that was. Now the guidelines are a little bit more broad or flexible in terms that they have to have sort of an established relationship. So it could be a significant other. That doesn't have to be a marital situation. It could be a significant other of any sort. It could be a brother or a sister, a kid, a stepkid, a parent, a step parent, and so on. So I guess the short answer is sort of yes.
Yes.
But there's ways to make that as painless as possible. And then another question just came in. What exactly is included in closing costs? I'm going to take this one.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's good.
So there's a number of categories that go into closing costs, and you sort of gave a percentage. And when I talk to buyers that are buying for the first time, or frankly, even buyers who are buying for the 12th time, because this isn't something that we keep in our minds unless we have to. The closing costs can vary percentage-wise a fair amount. For example, the city of Chicago has a transfer tax that's a little bit onerous, frankly. That's part of that estimate that we give that you wouldn't have if you were buying a home in Niles, let's say, right?
Yeah.
Just across town. So that's going to change the amount of closing costs that you need to have.
But the state, the county, there are lots of different kinds of transfer taxes.
So those are just taxes or transfer stamps, they call them. So that's one category, is any sort of municipal obligation like taxes. There are title company fees, and that title company fee is not determined by which agent you work with or which lender you work with, but the sellers, when they're scheduling the closing, they have a relationship with the title company. The title company is going to perform some services. Those services are going to be make sure the seller selling you the home actually owns it and has the right to sell it. They're going to make sure that when you buy the home, that they record with the county that you are now the rightful and legal owner. They're going to make sure there aren't other encumbrances like, I don't know.
Liens. A plumber came once, put a lien against the property.
Exactly.
Now you owe that.
Exactly. So the title company has, and there's insurance in the title company as well. So there's title fees. So we talked about municipal stuff. We talked about title fees. The lender has some costs. Those are called origination fees or processing fees. And then the attorney will have some fees in there. And those are kind of the big categories. You'll also have some prepaid items. So most of the time you're going to do what's called escrowing your insurance and your property taxes. And escrow means instead of getting one big bill from your insurance provider every year or getting two big bills from your county every year, you're going to pay a monthly proration of that into an account. Your lender or your loan servicer is going to handle that, and then they're going to pay that out when the bills come out, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. So all of those things are going to go into your closing costs. But
you can also expect some credits. Again, we talked about inspection credits. If something came up and they're not going to fix it, they're going to give you the money to correct it, as well as real estate taxes, right? So real estate taxes in Illinois are paid in arrears, meaning the 2023 taxes are paid in 2024. So if you were to close on July 1st of this year, that January 1st to July 1st is actually not going to be billed till next year. So we do a proration on the contract where you are credited at closing that can help bring down some of those closing costs, because when next year rolls around and that bill comes out, you're going to be responsible for paying it. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
For sure. That's a great point. Depending on timing, you may get as many as 8 or 9 months worth of property tax credits to you, and that'll reduce your cash to close. Yeah, absolutely. And look at this. This is a loaded question. What's your best advice for a first-time home buyer?
My best advice, take your time. I know that you're going to hear a lot about how frantic the market is, how competitive the market is, and that is true, but it's only once you get into it to buy. Listen to your real estate agent, get educated, spend the time, ask your questions. You never want to feel pressured into a purchase like this. And then when you feel ready, we will be ready to go and we can move quickly. But, that's the only thing. I think there are some people who are like, go, 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 and you've got to feel rushed. And the worst type of purchase is one that you don't feel like you were in control of, and worked with a team that really supported you. So that would be my advice.
That's awesome. And I'll add to what Marjorie said, or maybe I'll just throw some flowers towards Marjorie and say that there you go. And say that working with Marjorie, and I've realized it just sounds like I'm a shill for you. But I heard what you just said. Marjorie is patient and she will guide you through the process. And she really truly listens to her clients. And so if you feel anxiety in the process, not only are you going to give them the education and the experience to understand where that anxiety goes and the reality of it and the just pure emotion of it, but you're also not going to push somebody into making a move that they're not ready to make.
And you can really trust your gut on this, because you're going to find that property and you're going to know it's the right one. You'll be glad you waited. And to that point, there's a question in here: when do I get the keys? You get the keys at the closing table. So that's that. You pay the money and they hand you your keys.
Yeah, that's the best part. I think really the only obligation after you get your keys is that you have to invite the two of us over for the housewarming. Right?
Obligation or benefit.
That's true.
You know?
That's
ways
true.
to do.
If we get invited, we won't come empty-handed. Should we wait another second or two and see if there are any other questions here? I think we've got all the ones that are there. Looks good. Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you all for attending our Homebuyer Success webinar.
We're so happy that you came. We're going to send out this video and we look forward to helping you with your success in the future. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask those additional questions.
Absolutely. And there's our contact information there on the screen. You can reach Marjorie by phone, by email, at her website, similarly to me. And what about your social media handles? Are you
what are my social media? I'm on Instagram. Well, I'm on Facebook. I really like Instagram, though. Follow me on Instagram.
Just look her up on Instagram. And I was the setup. My handles are just Jason Lenz, JASON LENDS, on pretty much all the platforms, and you can find us there. And if you can find me, then you can find Marjorie.
I think I'm Marjorie Allabastro, Realtor.
Marjorie _Allabastro
_Realtor.
Did you hear that in your earpiece? That was pretty.
Testing.
Well, thank you to our technical team and our support today, and thanks to you folks for coming out and joining us. This was a lot of fun, and we hope to talk to you real soon.
Excellent. Happy Valentine's.